Jude Rogers and Karl Bartos.
Hello everyone, can you hear us okay?
Hallo, guten Tag.
We can hear Karl. I've got my phone here for time, I'm not going to call anybody. Wasn't that fantastic? We were sitting there backstage and Karl was hardly restraining himself with excitement. That was wonderful, thank you. Ebony Steel Band, that was great. Yes, I'm Jude Rogers, I'm delighted to be here. With a member of one of my favourite bands, probably my favourite band of all time.
Oh, come on.
No, seriously.
You have to say it now.
I have to say that. That is true. I say that to every band. Yes, exactly. No, I'm delighted to be here. And if you haven't got it yet, I know you'll be getting it later. The Sound of the Machine is such a fantastic book. It's a detailed exploration of the band we all know and love, and the man whose life before and after Kraftwerk is also incredibly interesting. And I've learned so much about a band I thought I knew a lot about already, I have to say, from Karl's book. Now, I know that music and the joy of music is so important to you. Can you sum up how music has shaped your life?
Well, it's hard to sum up, that's why I wrote the book. But why did I write the book? I had this job at the University of the Arts in Berlin, and they asked me to do a seminar on Kraftwerk, which took me by surprise, really, because I said before I'm never going to do it, but they asked me anyway. But I refused, so I did a lecture instead, or a seminar on the Beatles recording sessions in Abbey Road studio, and started to write the book. Because there was, I didn't really know what was going on then, actually, and I had to write it, and I had to analyze it, because now we live in a completely different world than we composed our music in the 70s. The future isn't that what it was when we wrote about the future. So I went through this not always very happy process of analyzing what we did, and I found out it's not the only thing I have to write about the story of Kraftwerk and what I was going to do there, hang around or whatever. So I wanted to write something what I have learned from music, from the nature of, and I wanted to say something about the nature of music itself. Is this summary enough?
Yeah. From the beginning, music is a source of great wonder to you. There's a wonderful bit when you first hear the clang. At the beginning of A Hard Day's Night.
Yeah.
And you get to know somebody from the north of England quite well. You can tell us a little bit about that and how music was in your childhood and your early teens. It was just this source of great joy for you.
Yeah. Well, normally if you grow up, sound is very natural to you. You just walk around and you hear the bells from the church, you hear people talking, singing, and then later on we had a radio in our home. But it was just radio on, radio off, and it sounds nice, but music doesn't speak to me. And when my brother-in-law, Peter Hornshaw, he is an English soldier at the time, because in Düsseldorf we were the British occupied zone. But I didn't know that, of course. So these two gentlemen, Peter and Terry, they came to our house for some reason I explain in the book. I have to explain. Peter fell in love with my sister, and one day he brought along this record. And he said, "This is a new Beatles record." I didn't know Beatles. Who's that? And then, clang! It's been a hard day's night, and it was just from this second on when I heard this record, I knew I would become a musician. I don't know why. It was just magic, magic from Liverpool.
And as you're going through, your love of pop music when you're little, you start playing, you become a classically trained musician, you're studying music. This is going on through the early 1970s. And then you get a phone call, you get contacted because you might be able to help a band that have been going for a few years but are changing a little bit. And you talk about the day you go to Kling Klang for the first time. Tell us about how you became part of Kraftwerk, that process.
Yeah, so I was studying music at the Robert Schumann Conservatory and playing at the same time in the opera for a couple of years. And my professor, he got a phone call from somebody in Kraftwerk. His name was, he didn't remember his name, something like Esleben, he told me. And actually it was Florian Schneider-Esleben. And he told my professor that they needed a classical trained percussion player for some gigs. We don't have the word gigs in Germany, so we call it for concerts or something. Nobody knew what a gig would be. So it was just a performance or a concert or something like that. A job for us professional musicians. It's a job. We're going to play the magic flute, and tomorrow we play some Wagner story and so on. So I called Florian, and he said, yeah, we need blah, blah, blah. Please come over. And I went to Kling Klang for the first time. And yeah, they showed me an electronic drum kit, which I didn't know what it was. And I made just chuck, 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 chuck. It was very, very soft sound. I said, okay, I'm going to do it. What's going on? So, and we played a song. It was, I think it must have been Ruckzuck, very early Kraftwerk song, with just very easy drum loop to play. So, and then we said goodbye, and that was it.
How did Ralph and Florian strike you when you first met them?
They seemed to be very, very lovely and very nice and very polite. You know, in the circle of professional musicians or people who study music, or in the opera house, there's a certain language. What you learn, not by lessons, but when you be there, you take on this language. And Ralph and Florian didn't speak that language. They were quite different, but it wasn't so much in detail at the first appearance. But they called me then, and we went on to several sessions. And in the end, we turned out, they said, we are going, Autobahn was not released. And they said to me, would you mind to come with us to America? We have a couple of gigs there, because our last record is going in the charts. And what would you say if we are going to tour in America? So we talked about several weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, and we stayed there for, I guess it was 3 months. And it was just a major experience in my life. From coast to coast in America in 1975. It was fantastic.
So 2 to 3 weeks became 16 years in the end.
Yeah, in the end, 16 years. So, not unfortunately, fortunately, we could work together very well in the beginning. And we were really having a good time.
You write very beautifully about how the music struck you in the 1970s. You write about how Autobahn was like a romantic tone poem or a painting. You know, as a musician, you write very beautifully about, what those songs suggest to you in terms of their sounds. Autobahn becomes a big hit in a lot of places, and then you do some work on radioactivity as well. You write about how the German identity of Kraftwerk was something that obviously Ralph and Florian were writing about a little bit, and you write about radioactivity and some elements of that you weren't as comfortable with. And then we come through to the albums and where your involvement, just becomes something you very much enjoy. So we're talking Trans-Europe Express and Man Machine and Computer World. Tell me about the process of becoming involved in as part of that band and that world. That there was a sort of shift between radioactivity and Trans-Europe Express, really, wasn't there?
Yeah, Well, Ralph and Florian, my ex-partners, they were not so much involved in English music like the Beatles. They had a tendency to look to America. But for some reason I grew up with English music, and then I had the perspective to America. I didn't know Chuck Berry when I've heard the Beatles, or all the black musicians of America. So, but to me, I always find it very interesting how the Beatles were playing with this Englishness. So they, like Sgt. Pepper, or all this, the English culture, they took and played with it. And Kraftwerk, not intentionally, they didn't want to copy the Beatles. They were very much into the German history. I didn't so much thought at the time we were living in a vacuum, a cultural vacuum, because of the Second World War. But Ralph and Florian did, and they wanted to close the gap to before the Second World War, to the artists and the music and the film of the Weimar Republic then. And I think we made the mistake for Autobahn was very easy because of, you probably know the language, the lyrics, fun. It was perfect for America, and it was a happy road movie. And then for some reason, we didn't make the record radio. It had to be radioactivity, with the mixed pleasure of radioactivity, a song on the air, and atomic bombs, and the dimension of radioactive energy. And you know the cover with the Volksempfänger. And so
this is the radio that was made in the 30s by the Nazis, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And this wasn't, in my opinion, not a very good idea. So the next step was to come back to Europe, and instead of going to playing with the German identity.
As in, you wanted to go forward, not look back.
Well, not me really. It had to go forward.
Yeah.
So and it was a step in the right direction, to not to focus on Germany but to focus on Europe then. Well, it's not good to say after Brexit.
I was going to say, do you remember those glorious days? Some of us still do look to Europe, I have to say.
Anyway, we're talking about the 70s, right? And the idea of the United States of Europe was defined by Winston Churchill, wasn't it? So I really loved this idea and this album, and I really loved the song. And it was great, and it took us one step further. And we did a lot of touring, not a lot of touring, but some gigs we played with Trans Europe Express, and we still have had a good time.
Before we kind of, you mentioning playing gigs, the Kraftwerk tour of 1975 in the UK is talked about in sort of legendary terms. There was, I know obviously Andy McCluskey from OMD talks regularly about the amazing moment when he saw, you playing.
He's romantic about it.
It's this tour in 1975 of, kind of playing Croydon and Coventry and these little venues, and they were half full, but a lot of people went to the gigs. It was like people going to see, the Sex Pistols a year later. It was like, transformed, the outlook of a lot of people. But by the time of Trans Europe Express, the idea of Kraftwerk as this artistic entity is really taking such beautiful shape, to a fan. But what's great about this book is on the inside we hear about what was really going on with them as people. We have Kraftwerk going clubbing. We have Florian with his golf clubs in his boot of his sports car. We have all these details of Kraftwerk as human beings. And Kraftwerk aren't often written about like human beings. You know, they're written about like these machine musicians. And that's something that obviously was very important to you to correct and get into this book.
Yeah, the thing was with the early Kraftwerk, it was in the analog era. So we used to play with a beatbox. It was Ralph, Florian and me and Wolfgang on stage. So we played like a classic ensemble with a beatbox. And later on, we turned into a beatbox for some reason, but we go to this later.
You are, I might pull up on that now though, actually. You are somebody who, throughout the book, talks about the importance of people playing together, human beings creating music together. And that late 70s period through to the early 1980s, you talk about this childlike joy that you have looking at each other in the studio and making music.
Yes,
what are your favourite memories of those experiences?
Yeah, so I think the nature of music, the nature of culture is like conversation. So in music, it's on the different levels of the society, on the different levels of culture. In music, it's just like one instrument talks to another instrument, and a third instrument gives a comment on that. So the counterpoint, I would say, is in the center of human beings making music together, the conversation. So in the early time, we were talking a lot about music and the world and everything, about our heritage, where we came from, where we come from, and our conversations were transformed into music. We talked in language, and then we talked into music. And because we had so many conversations going on, and we talked all the time, it was very easy to turn from language to music. So from the words to the abstraction of music. And I think our writing sessions, what I describe in the book, they were just the center of what I liked so much about being in Kraftwerk. We came together, we looked each other in the eye, and the machine, what we had in the studio, was just a 16-step sequencer. At the time I played drums by hand, or Wolfgang played drums by hand, and we were playing actually like these people. That's why they fit so perfectly well in this connection, because this is actually a metaphor how we compose this music.
I think as well, listening to the Ebony Steel Band earlier on, you hear the tunes are so beautiful. And Kraftwerk are often talked about in terms of the machines. Your book is called The Sound of the Machine. The machine almost gets privileged or prioritized in conversations about Kraftwerk. But the thing I always go back to as a Kraftwerk fan is there's a real innocence and a sort of nursery rhyme, childlike wonder about these songs and these tracks. And that's something you also wrote about in the book, this wide-eyed, joy in it. The late 70s, you also, in the book, you talk about the history of the time and how that has an impact on what you're writing. You write about Voyager going up to space in the late 1970s with a record on it, with music, and how that influenced Space Lab.
The sounds of Earth.
Yes. But how there's all this excitement about possibilities of space and the future at that time. And that is fed into your music too, isn't it?
Yeah, but we have to keep in mind, we discover now, we live in urgent times, and today we can't look at tomorrow's world like we did in the past. The future has changed completely. And for me, if I listen to a song like Space Lab, And the connection to Werner von Braun also makes me feel not so very happy.
Can you explain what you mean by that a little bit? You know, he is the man who invented the
especially
V2 rocket. In London.
In London. You know, he was a very famous scientist in Germany, and unfortunately, he was super clever and a businessman and very talented. And he came up with this idea instead of building, what's the name, power tanks or whatever, a rocket, because Germany as a country could build rockets because nobody knew what a rocket was. So, and he got successful, but Germany lost the war, and he went to America, and he was really responsible for the development of the NASA.
Yeah.
And landing on the moon. And when we came together, and he died in 1977, exactly when we were working on the man machine.
Yeah.
And at that time, the news were full of this space lab, NASA, what was it called?
The satellite.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So and we thought we should write a song about space.
Yeah, so that's the first, you know, the precursor to the International Space Center, the ISS.
Well, the same applies to the robots. There was this movie, Star Wars, and we were full of these science fiction ideas, and so. And these two robots, one of them were completely a copy of this Metropolis robot, Maria.
Yeah.
So, and that's how Kraftwerk slightly turned into a synonym for scientific progress.
I love that, the context of Star Wars next to you working on the robots. You know, there's something because this book is written in such detail of your timeline, those little connections are lovely. And obviously, you talk about when your robot, Karl, is made, and we have a photograph in the book of the actual process.
Yeah.
You talk really beautifully about when you're making the Computer World album and the writing of Computer Love and the melody you come up with. Tell us about that, because it was just lovely to hear about the process.
Computer Love. So we had this procedure of writing sessions, and I kept preparing for the writing sessions, composing. I was teaching at the time at the music school in close to Düsseldorf, in a small town. And they had a wonderful piano, and I came up with this melody and brought it to the Klingklang studio and played off a synthesizer. It sounded slightly different, as of a Steinway piano, of course. And so this song was so easy to write, actually. It took just an instant to write the song, because I played the melody, and instantly Ralph came up with the B part, which was called then Ravel for some reason. I don't know why, but he invented this melody, the counter melody, which became, in our song, the chorus. And somebody else picked the song up later on.
Yeah, we were talking about that, and then many years later, I heard a Coldplay track on the radio, and I was like, 1 minute, and there we are. Tell us about Kraftwerk going clubbing. I want to hear more about your disco days.
You're interested in clubbing, aren't you?
I obviously, we've all seen the video to Showroom Dummies, where there's a little bit of dancing, but I just love the idea of Kraftwerk knocking off at the end of a day in the studio and going into town.
Yeah. Well,
but you were influenced by the music of that time, is what I'm interested in. The disco was coming in, and then you thought about what beats you might use in your songs, or you talk about quickening the pace of your songs.
Well, in the 70s, clubbing was very different. So it was a time, robots and Man Machine was the time of Saturday Night Fever, really. And the thing is, when I was a little boy, I've played with the choreographer, Lester Wilson. So we had a few gigs with him. I wasn't in Kraftwerk, but I played with him. And I didn't know, when we were in America and promoted the Man Machine, the Bee Gees took off. amazing. It was a good performance by John Travolta, but everybody was into this groove, and so the Man Machine didn't sell so much in America. To say nothing really. It was just not the right time for robots, and so it was the right time for Saturday Night Fever. But the disco era was quite different than later on the 80s and the 90s. It was a different world.
I love the fact that you're taking in these influences from outside. I think we can so often think of Kraftwerk as this entity in Kling Klang, never leaving Kling Klang, which I know that's what happened eventually. But you went out and absorbed other culture. You write about how Florian talked to you about his love of Stevie Wonder and Roxy music, and you talk about the beginning of the Radioactivity album being like Astronomy Domine by Pink Floyd, which I'd never made that connection before. So was it important for you to show Kraftwerk as part of a wider world of other music?
I really don't know what I thought at the time. It was just so exciting. It was really exciting because we got along so very well. I think it must have been some sort of attraction. We were young and happy, and sexual active. So it was this, I don't want to talk too much about boys talk, but I was 22 when I entered Kraftwerk, so it's a special, I wouldn't say it's like the same as in puberty, but maybe it's a...
Young adulthood, isn't it? You're just excitable.
It's the eternal puberty, maybe. So if you're in a band, Bernard said sometimes to me, Bernard Sumner, a friend of mine, he said, playing in a band is just like an eternal adolescence. So in a bit, Kraftwerk in the beginning, I mean, this is why we could play so happy music. We were having a good time all the time.
Yeah. Now, you talk about some of the tracks you write that you co-write that have an influence elsewhere. Numbers, for instance. The beat of Numbers becomes such a massive part of the electronic music culture in America. It's the early roots of techno and house. And when you talk about when you first hear Planet Rock by Afrika Bambaataa, what was it like to hear your music being taken and used in different ways? Yeah, it was. Short before that time, I purchased an 808 drum machine. But in my bedroom, it sounded different than on the dance floor, of course. And we didn't like the sound into Kraftwerk at that time because everybody was using it. Right.
It was a perfect machine, but we had this machinery built long time before. We had this so-called Triggersumme, which had exactly this logic of the 808 drum machine, but 6 times. So we had six times in a row, and I could improvise on these rhythm bottoms, like on a piano board. So that's how we really composed Computer World. So when I heard Planet Rock, I thought, well, it's beautiful. The black colleagues discovered the drum machine. This was, I really remembered, finally they got it. And I knew what's going to happen then, because the track was so really good. But, I didn't know at the time when I heard it the first time what would happen. It was nice though.
Yeah, I bet.
So the song, it was a little bit after I've heard the Beatles record, Hard Day's Night, the long player. My sister Marietta, she had a song by Cliff Richard, English singer. It was called Do You Wanna Dance? Do You Wanna Dance? A fantastic song by a black American composer. And the introduction was playing by the Shadows, the drummer of the Shadows, and it was fantastic. And I was just starting to play drums. I fell in love with this intro. Yeah, drums at the beginning of a song. That's just what you like if you're a teenager. And somehow I copied the mood of this introduction in my subconscious. Something like that. And somehow when I went into Kraftwerk, my subconscious played tricks on me. And after we went to a coffee shop in the late afternoon, we went to the Kling studio, and I go to the electronic drum kit, and I played this introduction, but my subconscious changed it somehow. Like 5-6 years later, I would have copied this introduction from the original song and inserted in the tape machine. On the tape machine. But at that time, pre-sampling, I played it by hand and I did it all wrong. Or my subconscious copied the feeling I had when I was a teenager and not the acoustic photography.
So what did that become? Was that the beat that became...
And this beat, which wasn't actually... this song, the introduction by Brian Bennett or whatever the drummer called, it was something I invented in this moment. And immediately, and it happens a lot of times, the drummer came up with this line. I don't know, it was so easy at that time. Because we were looking in the eye and we were laughing. And it was really, really fun.
So that is Cliff Richard, basically is the root of computer love. Well, there we are.
No. No, it wasn't computer love. Numbers.
Oh, it was numbers. Oh, Cliff Richard, the father of techno.
I wouldn't make Sir Cliff Richard responsible for numbers. So if ever, it was the black composer and the drummer.
Yes.
Cliff had a wonderful voice, and the song is really good. You can listen to it on the internet.
Oh, we'll have to.
It's still there. It's a great song, and the Shadows played it great. Even the guitar solo, it's fantastic.
So there we go. The roots. I love these little misrememberings. It's fantastic. Now, so something changes in the early 1980s. Computer World comes out. It's a great success. You get a British #1 in early 1982 with a song that was first released, 4 years previously. Obviously, the model is the B-side, but that becomes the song that's played a lot on the radio. I love you say it's your day tripper kind of moment.
Day tripper, we can work it out.
We can work it out. It's the double A, isn't it? Yeah, that's your moment. But so what changes in the early 1980s? Because suddenly the mood changes in the Kraftwerk camp. What happened?
Well, we started to work after our world tour, which was 80 concerts in a couple of months, half a year, 80 concerts around the world. So we started immediately. Florian bought his first sampler, and we started to compose, and we played some songs which we played on sound checks. In London, for instance, I play on the keyboard, dun 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 dun. In London, like I thought about the Rolling Stones, how they started up here in London. Also, I played this riff, and it was the beginning of this record, which was called Technopop. I thought it was a really good title. Ralph came up with, or had from a magazine or whatever, and we composed this song Technopop, industrial rhythms all around, something like that. And some more, so Sex Object, strange song. And also the telephone call.
Yeah.
But this time we started with the sampler. And this changed the way how we created music. We invented this what shall I call it, this little trick of the acoustic photography. So how would acoustic photo of a robot really sound like? Bam, dee dum, diddle-dum. Well, we played it by hand, and we played it like jazz musicians would rehearse the theme of a song before they started with the improvisation. And this time it changed because we had so many telephone sounds, or Tour de France, so many sounds of a bicycle, which could one of us play on a sampler. Suddenly it was pre-computer, but one could come up with a theme. And before that, we were composing polyphonically.
So that connection between you,
yeah, job sharing. It was really, really good. And this changed it half the way. And then we started off, and we stuck somehow in this procedure because we recorded the early versions of the songs straight to the tape machine, to the multi-track. And in a way they were nailed down that way. We couldn't improvise. Whereas if we played Radioactivity, no, not Radio, but Trans-Europe Express, we even played live before the song was composed fully. So we had the chance to learn the song and learn from other songs. You know, Paul McCartney said this. He said, songs talk to each other. And this is very true. So, in a way, Showroom Dummies talks to the model. And so, especially by the Beatles, you have this interconnection, this conversation going on between the songs, especially Lennon and McCartney. And in Kraftwerk, it was kind of the same. But if you nail them down too early, you stuck in the beginning, and the song can't develop.
There's a quote, if you don't mind, I'm going to read from your book about that period. You talk about how you lost your flow, being in that flow of energy as a band.
Yeah.
We didn't even think about how to reach that state of flow because we didn't notice that we'd lost it. Instead, the latest products on the music market, the loss of our USP, and rapidly developing technology distracted us hugely, blocking our view of our specific capital, autonomous imagination.
Yeah.
So technology at this point is obviously, racing ahead. Kraftwerk seemed to be, with Computer World, predicting how the computer would take over our lives, and then suddenly everything else was going, and you argue that the band became, not you, but the band as an entity became a bit too lost in the machine.
I think progress is a shining promise, and especially in the 70s, I thought so. The computer is just very welcome. I wouldn't say finally technology was making up to our level. I wouldn't say that. It's not true. I think it's just very useful saying. For me, the computer, when the computer turned up I was the first who bought a computer to program music, because it reminded me of the dream of Igor Stravinsky. He was so fantastic, and he was a fountainhead. Did you see how he writes music?
Yes, yeah.
Oh, it's so incredible. And to me, the computer was a sounding score. So I immediately understand what it was all about, and it didn't change my conception of music because it was like a score. But in addition to reading a score, it was sounding.
Yeah.
And I really loved it from the first day when I saw the first music program in America, when we were mixing mixing Electric Cafe. It changed the name for some reason, I don't know. But somebody changed it back recently. So it was completely inspirational to have this computer system, but I always had a piano at the side and a guitar.
Yeah.
And
it was one of many instruments.
Yeah, it was just one possibility to create music and to nail it down instead of a tape recorder. At the time, I thought it was free us for this mistake to record things too early instead of we stopped playing because some of us started with extreme sports because this record Electric Cafe was so unsuccessful again, and somehow we weren't so happy anymore in the studio, and we stopped playing together.
Yeah.
And we thought, we made the mistake to think our technology was not sophisticated enough. We didn't thought we were wrong. We thought we should improve our machinery to cope.
You talk about when you're trying to fix this as a member of Kraftwerk, in the early 1990s. You say it's not working anymore. We practically never talk music, and you eventually leave. This is in the run-up to the mix being released. And you talk about that as a point when Ralph becomes not a musician. Well, these are my words, not a creator of new music. But you call him. This is the point where he becomes the designer or curator of the Kraftwerk catalogue.
Yeah, that's true.
Now you've seen Kraftwerk playing in recent years as well. How do you feel about the ongoing Kraftwerk project now? Playing the old hits again and again. It's not what you would have expected necessarily.
Big screen, the biggest screen in the world, most expensive screen in the world, and I think if you go on stage with engineers, they are very important. Engineers are really important people. They solve problems, but very rarely they can expand the expression of art. So, and I think what's the secret with Kraftwerk is that we were working together as human beings polyphonically. And of course, Florian was very different to Ralph, and I was different to both of them. But somehow this was sort of the secret, how it worked. And I forgot the question. You too.
Me too. I guess I was trying to be very careful around it. What do you think
the
of
gig?
The kind of what do you think of the ongoing Kraftwerk project? The playing the old albums, playing the old and not doing anything new.
I think during the mix, it was the time you've heard Kraftwerk for the first time.
Yeah, it was.
I programmed it, most part of it. So I wasn't happy with programming it because you can't tidy up art. If you try to tidy up art, and you from the Mona Lisa, you take the hair, you take the eyes, and you take the nose, and you take the skin, and everything you see and the background, and then you bring it up together in a different. You rearrange it because you feel like you have to rearrange it. You're tidying up art, and I think it's impossible. You can try to make another Mona Lisa, or maybe you can try to paint a mustache.
The mustache, yeah.
But I think you can't tidy. It's impossible. And making remixes has just financial reasons. It was invented to bring songs in the 70s to the dance floor. So it was very clever, and some are really good, of course, like always. But for a concept for an arty band like Kraftwerk, I didn't like it so much. When I saw the Kraftwerk appearance, it made me very, very unhappy because all these songs were just rearranged, but all in the same way. So this very unusual concept of the acoustic portrait was suddenly placed in every song, except the model maybe. But everything was rearranged in the same process. And finally, what this futurist Marinetti said, he dreamed from the merge of man and machine. And as I think I've said it before, so we were playing with a music box, and now Kraftwerk became a music box. And I think a step not in the right direction. Maybe it's half the way right.
leaving Kraftwerk was obviously a huge thing to do, you know, and a very sad thing to do. You know, after that, you went on and, you know, made a lot of music in the 1990s, and we've talked very lovingly when we've spoken before about meeting Bernard Sumner and Johnny Marr, and how that friendship, you know, reinvigorated your love of music in many respects.
I mean, Johnny and Bernard and Andy McCluskey,
yes,
they saved my life really, because they came to me when I was really, really down at the moment. So I didn't feel, I never wanted to leave the band, because I saw there my future for the rest of my life really. And I just had to go, because it was so, the atmosphere, we weren't happy anymore. We haven't had a good time. So this marriage broke up, and Bernard wrote me a fax. Hey Karl, we are from Manchester and we are working on the next album. Are you want to work with us? So they came to Düsseldorf. They came actually to Düsseldorf, visit me in my studio in Düsseldorf. I had a studio for a couple of years. I remained in Düsseldorf. Now I live in Hamburg. I had to go because Düsseldorf is a small city, and every evening I run into Florian somewhere. So it was funny, but in a way, we had to leave. So we went to Hamburg. But then I almost spent really much time in Cheshire, in Manchester, and because my brother-in-law Peter is from Yorkshire, when I was a little boy, I had this North English feeling in me. So I felt at home, and they were so happy. It was just like the same feeling which we had when I was in Kraftwerk for the first time. So they saved my life, and the same happened with Andy. When I worked with Andy, it was the same fun. When we were in Liverpool, or in Dublin, I visited him once in LA. It was very strange. Andy and myself in LA looking at the ocean of light, sitting there and reflecting on the music. It was really fantastic, and we are still friends, all of them.
There were some lovely anecdotes about that time. I always say this to you: Neil Tennant's 40th birthday party. That's a story. You had quite a large hangover the next day. You do admit, yes. But it's wonderful to see, behind the curtain, all these things, different things, going on. You've gone into such detail in the book. How does it feel to have done that? To have spent all that time? Does it feel cathartic to get your side of the story out, or do you feel that there's more to go into? How do you feel after writing? It's a big book. It must have taken a lot of time.
You know how to write a book.
My book is smaller than yours.
Yeah, but you're just by yourself. You're just lonely, and you work hours on end. I worked years on this. I've written 1,000 pages. And then I released the German version of the book, and then I wanted to translate it into English, and I had to rewrite the book because there was some thoughts were really wrong, and I discovered when I tried to transfer it into English. So it's a different lens if you look at the world in each language, of course. And I thought a fantastic translator, Katie Derbyshire. She's from London and she lives in Berlin, so she speaks perfectly German. You wouldn't say she comes from London. And her father worked at the BBC as a sound engineer.
Right.
So she knew exactly what I was writing about when I go on into the technical realm. And when I was writing about music, her friends are all musicians. So I was very happy to meet her really, and to find her. And she was able to have the time because the book was so big.
You, I haven't mentioned, through the 2000s, you've carried on teaching. You we met when you released Off the Record in 2013. And you also have a lot of music that you haven't released.
Yeah.
Tell us about that and what's going to happen with that.
Well, I'm going to do it. So I'm not a flake. I'm not. So it's all there and all.
What is the music that you have?
Well, I have.
You have lots of demos from your time in Kraftwerk, don't you?
I have lots of demos from our writing sessions. I still have them. I kept them. I didn't delete them. They're all there, but they're secret, of course. There are people involved, and they are not my. I don't own them. They belong maybe to the British Library or to
I'm sure they take
Museum of Modern Art. I don't know, to Tate Gallery. But I just keep them. And
where do you keep them? I'm not going to rob your house.
Why?
Where do you keep them?
Where? Well, on different places.
Right.
On different places.
I'm not going to steal them.
So nobody can do anything with it. But maybe if I go back to eternity, somebody can release it.
Oh, your archive.
My archive
must be archived.
Yeah, but I've written during writing the book, and I've written a new pop music record. But this time, to keep it interested, to loosen it up a bit, I didn't record it. I have a D28 Martin guitar and a piano, of course, and I wrote sheet music and the lyrics, of course, and it's really funny. Like that's how we did it in the early days.
Right.
We even haven't had a tape recorder. We just wrote it down, and then if you rehearse music, which is not nailed down somewhere, you reach a new stage every time you play it, because it can only be in the world if you play it. And I wanted to go back to this stage again. And it happens. Your subconscious does all the work.
Right.
Like in the early days with Kraftwerk.
Yeah.
We recorded our demo tapes, but they were very rough. Some of them are really rough, and you hear us talk.
Oh, wonderful.
Somehow. And we were making jokes all the time and laughing and so. And we playing intentionally on purpose wrong and things like that. You know, like boys.
Yeah. Oh, lovely. Well, I want to hear that anyway.
No.
No. One day I will convince you. But it's lovely that you're talking about those early tapes, and obviously writing the book has brought you back to this. Even though leaving Kraftwerk was difficult, even though maybe thinking about Kraftwerk sometimes is difficult, I get the sense that writing this book has made you really appreciate what you did in Kraftwerk, for Kraftwerk.
Yeah, it's getting better all the time because I analyzed it and I know exactly what happened with the advent of digitalization. And I had to place it to the society in the book of nowadays, because it happens everywhere. You lose this job sharing and the computer takes the jobs, but the digital media copies the world for some reason. And everything in reality is not as good as a digital copy.
Yeah.
And I had to go to this analyzation that it happens to us.
Yeah.
And since I know it, it's easier to understand for me why.
When I wrote my book, to plug my book, I think it's available in the shop. A baby's brain can receive more information about music than a computer. No computer has ever been able to process sound and music in the same way.
Exactly.
And that's a baby who hasn't lived a life.
Yeah. Well, nobody will deny that the computer has changed the world. It's like these Swiss knives. There is one blade for this. There's a screwdriver and a fork. You can anything do with this with a Swiss knife. But in another perspective, if you climb a mountain by foot, you make an experience. But if you use a cable car, you come to the pinnacle and you see everything, but you're missing the experience.
Yeah.
And the same happened to us when we had the computer. Yeah, and because I made my thoughts about it, and I thought a lot about music in our context and music in general, it feels better, really.
There's some beautiful other stuff about, that when you last see Florian after he's left Kraftwerk, your fondness still for, that time. And yeah, it's a very, very beautiful, beautiful book, and I'm sure you'll get bad backs carrying it home tonight. But even though it's very big, it's incredibly readable, and we zip through it. It's wonderful. I've got some questions from the audience that were submitted before tonight. If you're still okay for me to ask you those, Karl?
Yes, some of it.
Some of it. Okay, I'm going to try and read my handwriting now, if I get these. Okay. Some of them we've already answered. How much unreleased Kraftwerk material is there? How much unreleased Kraftwerk material is there? Antonio Forte said, and you already hinted at that. Well, do you have an idea of the volume?
I can't really say. Probably the Kraftwerk band today, they must have tons of songs.
But there will be some that you know as well. Very secretive. He's very secretive.
They're working together now 30 years.
Yeah.
There must be 30 records.
Yeah.
60.
How much unreleased from your time with them, do you think?
Well, it depends. A demo tape is not unreleased work.
Yeah.
It gives an idea how we work, because we combined several ideas, and some of them, they were years apart. So we took an A part from a session we played maybe in '67, and then we took a part which we recorded in '81 or what. So it was a synthesis also.
Yes.
Being a child and becoming an adult and putting them together.
I like this very specific technical question from Howard Dearman. What is your favourite retro Roland drum machine? Is it an 808 or a 909?
I can't tell. To me, in pop music, many people make the mistake to say rhythm is just the thing what somebody plays on a drum kit. The elements of music, they are just melody, harmony, counterpoint. You have rhythm, you have dynamic, you have the color of the sound, and you have the tempo. There wouldn't any melody exist without rhythm. So these components, these elements, they belong together. You can tear them apart. So there is not a drum machine or a melody. It belongs. Music is the product of these elements, and you can't separate them. It's impossible.
Simon Helm asks, prepare yourself for this one, would you agree that Kraftwerk has become the world's best Kraftwerk tribute act?
Well, you can say that, but I'm afraid I cannot possibly comment.
Very much the diplomat. JP Gerber has asked lots of questions. I'm only going to ask a couple of them. How do you know when a song is worth pursuing?
That's a good question. If you still are inspired, and this is why I didn't record it, because if you take a piano or a guitar or you start to singing, you come up with so many new ideas immediately, instantly, because you have nothing to look at. If you write it down, you always look at it. Or if you record a melody, you hear it and you play along with the things you hear. Did you know that little kid, because you must know, that if you put a child on a computer and a keyboard, and they play keyboard, they stop playing if it plays in a loop.
Oh.
They can't react to a loop. We made it at the university. They immediately stop and they are afraid. They don't know what to do. I found it very, very interesting to hear. But now, modern music is always created with the bass drum, because it gives you the metronome.
Yeah.
And then you add the first layer, and then the second, but you are always in a loop. But there is no loop in the world. I mean, maybe the seasons, but nothing else really.
And they change.
Or the day and night or so. But something like a mechanical loop was invented in the, days before electricity was around.
Yes. And as we know, days and nights are always different, or at the moment, very hot, of course. And another question from JP Gerber. In what ways have people surprised you in how they took inspiration from you? Now, obviously, you told me you were sent the Ebony Steel Band music, and you loved it. You know, have there been any other arrangements or treatments of your music that has surprised you?
As I said before, Paul McCartney said, songs are talking to each other. It was always the case that one generation learned from the one before. So if you listen to the introduction, the overture of the Magic Flute, it sounds like Bach. Really, Johann Sebastian Bach. It's always the case and will ever be. And I've learned how to speak and to eat from my mother. And we are human beings and we copy. It's our nature. And I think it's quite good to copy for a certain amount of time. That's how the Beatles started. They copied Chuck Berry and then they played gigs and they made compositions in the in the style of Chuck Berry. And then life came in. They discovered their own personality and how to see the life through their lens, like John Lennon. I read the news today. And so it goes on and on and on.
What are your favourite cover versions of Kraftwerk songs? It's them, yeah. It's okay. Honestly, Karl's face backstage, that is, I know because that he's not lying. He absolutely loved it.
It's so happy.
Because the tunes really come out in the pants, don't they? It's wonderful. Where are we? I'm going through my questions here. Paul Wilkinson asks, well, I know the answer to this one. If you were still part of Kraftwerk, would you want to be doing the touring and playing lots of live shows?
You can't turn back the clock.
No. What if not? This is the part of the question I think is really interesting. What would you want the band to be doing? What would you like the band to be doing?
Change the perspective on tomorrow's world. I mean, if you are in the position of my former colleague, and you use your power to present a German astronaut on stage saying hello to Earth. I wouldn't do it if I was in this position, because I think there's going so many things wrong with technology, and progress and innovations are not synonyms, not necessarily. But it was our prospect in the 70s that they would be synonyms. But I think it's wrong to assume that.
Paul also would like to know your albums, Esperanto and the Electric Music album. Are you going to reissue any of your own solo
Yes,
recordings?
I will. I haven't had the time. I was writing.
You've been busy. You've been a very busy man.
This was very important to analyze everything and to be here and have this conversation with you.
Yes, of course. Ulrich Adelt, I'm just going to check the surname. Yes, Ulrich Adelt asks, how does your assessment of Kraftwerk's history compare to that of Wolfgang Fleer? Now, Wolfgang wrote his memoir a while ago, and I know you've been in touch a little bit with him over the years, but not really.
You should answer this question.
Yeah, I should really, shouldn't I? Did you read his book?
Yes, of course. We're still talking on the phone. He's playing the locked. He's doing DJ set.
Yes.
He's still.
I've seen them. I've seen one of them.
Yeah. So he's composing now, but I never did a song with him together.
Yeah.
And we have so much in common because of the past.
Yes.
But he lives still in Düsseldorf and I in Hamburg.
Yeah.
And I think it's really good to make interviews on Skype or FaceTime or Zoom.
Yeah.
So it's really good, and it's a good substitute.
Yeah.
It works.
Yeah.
It works. Also, it's better to speak face to face, but it works. But sending files back and forth to somebody in England, in America, or even in Germany, it doesn't make me happy.
No.
Because you're alone. I'm lonely in front of the computer all the time. And it doesn't help to receive somebody's work from somewhere. You have to have a good time together.
Yes. Last question. Christian Theobald asks, well, what are your plans for the near future? Hopefully having a bit of a rest after, writing and promoting your book. What are your plans for the near future? And will there be some live shows again?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Do you know when? Or is that on? Just, I think we'll take a yes. We will take a yes. Well, you can always play us some demos before your gigs. I can hear them. I won't have to steal them from you then. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, Karl. And thank you for your questions. You sent them in. Sorry I couldn't ask them all. We're going to have a bit more of the Ebony Steel Band. But yeah, thank you very much to Karl, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you.